So welcome, friends. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be in conversation with Gideon Maltz today. I want to just start by thanking Ellen and Andrew, who are beloved members of our community, for inviting IKAR to be a part of sharing and celebrating the Charles Bronfman Prize. This is, of course, as many of you, I guess you know, a prestigious annual award that recognizes extraordinary young humanitarians who do innovative work that is inspired by Jewish values and is designed not to have impact only on the Jewish community, but really to have global impact. So it's really wonderful to be able to meet all of the honorees who come through each year. And I want to thank Emily and Avital for helping us connect this year so that we could have a beautiful and rich conversation. So I'm going to start by sharing a little bit of a bio of Gideon. And then we'll be in conversation together. And as we are talking, if any questions emerge or if there are things you're wondering about, I would love for you to put them in the Q&A at the bottom, and I'll try and keep an eye on that. There's a lot for us to talk about, Gideon. I'm absolutely fascinated by your work and really grateful for the opportunity to be in conversation with you today. So Gideon is the CEO of the Tent Partnership for Refugees. Before this, he served as the executive director for 4 years of the organization and now is the CEO. Gideon is working to mobilize the world's largest employers to harness their growing demand for talent and for workers in order to hire refugees at every skill level into their workforces. And under Gideon's leadership, Tent has grown its corporate membership to more than 500 large companies in a dozen countries across the Americas and Europe, and they're committed to integrating refugees into the labor market at scale. It's astonishing just how many lives you've already touched. Those 500 large companies now have hired more than 240,000 refugees and are training and preparing another 180,800 refugees for job prep. It's really quite extraordinary what you've been able to do. I see that Jess has shared the link to your bio. So people can read more on your own afterwards. But I do want to mention that in addition to receiving the Charles Bronfman Prize, that Tent was recognized as a Time 100 Most Influential Companies honoree, which is really extraordinary. So Mazel Tov to you, Gideon, on all fronts. And thank you so much for being with us today. We're really looking forward to being in conversation with you. So I want to start, if we can, by just having you share with us about the current state of the global refugee crisis and why you believe that it is so urgent that we address it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rabbi Sharon, and thank you to the Bronfman Foundation team and family. It's been an extraordinary honor and privilege, an amazing experience working with them. To set out some quick context, there are today more than 40 million refugees displaced around the world. And what is driving this number ever higher is both new crises, new conflicts, but also, unlike in previous decades, the conflicts and crises we have never end. There are just frozen conflicts and crises really in every part of the world. And so refugees have not just been displaced in huge numbers, they're being displaced for years, often decades, without the ability to go home. Most of these refugees are concentrated in the developing world, where most of the crises are. So they're in places like Bangladesh and Pakistan and Kenya. And at the same time, you have in Europe and North America, um, uh, aging economies, birth rates well below replacement, huge structural labor shortages, and a need for people. And historically, Europe and North America, especially the US, have been quite good about allowing at least some refugees to come to their countries. But what we saw is that of those refugees who are arriving, they were quite slow to be able to find work. And we wanted both to accelerate that because it was so meaningful for their lives, but also saw that if we did a better job at helping refugees get jobs, then it might actually create the conditions for countries to allow more people to come over time and address some of that sort of global imbalance.
So there's this sort of basic calculation that you made, it seems to me, reading about the work, that there are more refugees than ever. There's also a massive labor shortage, and you step into that space and say, okay, so here's an opportunity, right? Which I love. I really love that idea. So I want to talk a little bit about the connection between dignity and work. This is actually a very Jewish idea. I mean, it says in the book of Psalms, "By the labor of your hands you'll live." And in the Gemara, the rabbis say, they say, "Gadol haneh migio yoter mirei shamayim." They say it's Rabbi Chia bar Ami, and he says someone who benefits from their labor, it's even at a higher spiritual level than someone who fears God. I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary statement. And I was struck by, in reading about your work, that Hamdi Yulukaya, am I saying his name right? Who is the Shobani CEO and also the founder of the Tent Partnership for Refugees, said the minute that a refugee gets a job, that's the minute they stop being a refugee. And so I wonder if you could talk to us about how you see meaningful work as part of human dignity. And
Yeah.
how does your Jewish faith shape that vision, if it does in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the reason it is so profoundly important, especially in the context of refugees, is that refugees are defined almost entirely by their victimhood. They are people who have been forced to flee. They've landed up in conditions where, they might live in refugee camps. They get assistance from international organizations. They come to the US. They are, in the best way possible, treated as victims and as beneficiaries of charity. And they're defined entirely by their victimhood. And the workplace is really the first time that they actually meet the members of their community as equals. It's the first time that they're not just receiving charity, as important as that is. It's the first time they actually, on a manufacturing floor, they're actually meeting members of their community for the first time as equals. And I think what we've seen from refugees, every person you speak to, is that they say that is the moment where they transition from being a victim to being somebody who feels like a productive member of the community. And I think most humans don't want to be victims, even if they are. And that's such a so that is that moment where they are defined by something other than their victimhood. And that's what Hamdi means when he says they no longer feel like refugees at that moment.
Like it both gives them a sense of place and a sense of purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also just a hugely important vector for integration. I mean, the workplace is where empirically we know that people learn language much more quickly in the workplace. They're more likely to forge bonds with members of other communities. That is how they acculturate. And so the workplace is also just hugely important as a driver for members for refugees to feel like they belong in the community, and to become American.
It's something I'm honestly really worried about, given the trend lines, and what we're projecting the whole economy is going to look like in the course of the next couple of years with AI. And it strikes me that we're in this very precarious moment right now, in which we're seeing, on one hand, the rise of authoritarianism and fascism and strongmen around the world, that at precisely the same moment of climate devastation and the warning that there are going to be a billion climate refugees, in the next 15 years or so, at the same time that we're getting warnings from the creators of AI that 80% of what we all do is going to be done with the click of a button within the course of the next 2 years. And so you actually are positioned right at the sweet spot of being able to address and respond to this crisis. And I'm also really worried because you're seeing right now, what happens to people when are not able to work, and how absolutely essential work is to our self-understanding, to our sense of being able to put roots in a place, but also to being able to fulfill a sense of purpose in the world. So I hear this both as a warning. The kind of displacement that you are working to address is going to be experienced by many, many more people in the days ahead. And also as it's a very hopeful reminder that when we are able to connect people to meaningful work, that it can reinvigorate our sense of purpose and connection.
Yeah. 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 I mean, this is such a huge and important topic. You know, I think economists will probably say that in the long run, much like other technologies, some jobs will be destroyed and new ones will be created. I think the challenge is that that period of disruption can take a long time, and the way that plays out and the way that the anxiety that creates can be hugely disruptive and help fuel some of the worst political tendencies. Like I think um, when large swaths of the public feel stressed and they feel anxious, they become more xenophobic and they are more likely to embrace strongman leaders. And so I think the political ramifications of that are are quite scary. I think for the work that we do very, very sort of narrowly. Ironically, some of the sectors that refugees are most likely to work in, which are sort of service sectors like, healthcare and elder care and agriculture, are probably slightly more likely to be hospitality, probably slightly more likely to actually be less affected by AI. But that's scant consolation because I think the political effects might be very negative indeed.
Okay, okay. I want to ask you how you hold on to a sense of moral urgency around the work without burning out. I mean, you've been in this, you were the executive director starting in 2017. So you've been in a very senior role in this organization already for 9 years, and you're doing absolutely extraordinary work. But how do you personally find the strength to continue in the hard work and to work with such a sense of urgency that in a way kind of never ends? I mean, as soon as you place your first 1,000 people, then there's 100,000 more that need to be, that need to be supported, and then you support 280,000, but all of a sudden there are millions more. So I'm just curious how you hold on to that sense of urgency, as you stay in the work for the long haul.
Um, I think it helped that I came from an even more difficult, hopeless job. In the Obama administration, I worked for Samantha Power on mass
Uh,
atrocity issues, and that is
on what?
mass atrocity
Uh-huh.
issues, and so that is even harder, even bleaker, even less hopeful set of work. And what I appreciate about the work that I've been doing in the last decade is that it is actually possible to see a pragmatic solution to this problem. It's not that easy to get there, but there are these twin problems that you mentioned, the problem of refugees not getting work and the problem of companies not being able to find enough people that are the answer to each other. And it is actually possible, notwithstanding setbacks, it is actually possible to see progress. It's actually possible to see some pragmatic solution to this. And so there's enough that keeps me going. Even though this work is rife with, it's very cyclical. And I think one experiences the negative cycles, knowing that it will circle back around, and the devastation that this administration, the US, is wreaking will create the seeds of a backlash against that, which will then, at some point bring in a better environment, and one hopes that one can then just, take better advantage of the good moments and mitigate the bad ones, and just keep going.
Right, right. Well, I want to push this a little bit further because I imagine that the work has always been hard. Since, before you started. It's probably harder now, I'm guessing, in the last year, given this administration. And I wonder how leading through crisis has shaped your understanding of leadership and what is being asked of you and what is being asked of all of us.
Um, Let me start by just addressing the premise, which is that it's harder now. In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. I mean, what's harder now is that the Trump administration has been far, far more aggressive at blocking all routes for refugees to enter. But more narrowly in the work that we do, when we started this about a decade ago, the refugee issue set was really just seen as sort of like a problem. It's a set of victims. What do we do about that? And there really wasn't any sense of there actually being a benefit for countries to take in refugee, a benefit for companies. And in 2016, we had worked with about 50 companies on this issue. And at the start of the first Trump administration, those companies vanished. They just didn't see enough real value in this work to brave the politics. And this time around, even though the political context has been far, far more toxic, almost all of the major companies that we work with continue to work with us, continue to want to do the work. They may not want to shout about it publicly, but they see the value in it. And that is a sea change, that even with in this political environment, that the biggest companies are still interested in doing this work, because they understand the value of it to their workforces and to their communities, is for us actually puts us in a far, far better place than we were 8 years ago. Um, in terms of you know, leading through this moment, um, uh, it's uh, it's incredibly challenging, and I think part of what's challenging that we have on our own staff, employees who have a refugee background, who are sort of navigating so much of the anxiety that many refugees are, whether, you know, even though they are here legally and are work authorized, might they get picked up by ICE, and might they, be improperly detained? Might their work authorization be revoked? And I think that's incredibly valuable, and just grounding us in just the sort of like very difficult daily realities of the people we're trying to help. And it's just a daily tension between trying to look for, you know, if trying to be so understanding of every challenge, and then trying to look for every small win, wherever we can find it, and just having a sort of principle of like, can we make it's, the context is very bleak. We can't solve for it, but can we make things slightly better for one person here, for one person there, and just being as focused as we can on these very, very small wins.
Hmm.
And then hope that in a few years the context will change and we can actually do big important things.
So I want to ask you about some of these large corporations. And by the way, I'm going to just reiterate, if folks have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A function, and I'll take a look at that. Um, because the way that you're able to get hundreds of thousands of people employed is that you're really working with the biggest corporations in the country. Amazon, Home Depot, presumably Target. I mean, these are major, major employers. these are also some of the companies that are now under scrutiny for allowing their properties to be used as staging ground for these ICE raids on our neighborhoods. And it's complicated. And so I wonder if you've thought about that and how you engage in partnership with some of these very powerful corporations. And if you think that there's a pathway to engaging in I think, hopefully a more fruitful conversation with them about some of these business practices that many of us see as endangering our neighbors, since you've been working to develop relationships with them.
Yeah, yeah. So, there's a couple things we think about. I mean, one is anything that a company might do that is actually um, treating refugee employees poorly or any kind of discrimination that arises very rarely, but that is, very squarely the focus of what we do. And when that arises, that's something that we take extremely seriously. Um, the issue that you're raising around, whether companies might be complicit in other ways is something that we have a fairly nuanced view on. I mean, I think ultimately we ask the question, what actually, leaving the sort of symbolism and optics aside, what can we do that is actually going to be more helpful for the people that we're ultimately trying to serve? And the assessment we make is that if we certainly private conversations with companies is one thing, but we often are called upon to publicly criticize a company, and pragmatically the only us talking about a company publicly is not going to change that company's conduct. It is going to mean that that company hires fewer refugees.
Right, right, right.
Um, One of the things that worked for many years with Samantha Power, and in the government context, she was just always super, super focused of like, can we make things just a little bit better? We can't solve everything, but can we make things just a little bit better? And I think that's sort of the spirit we bring to these company relationships, which is, if we think we can help people, refugees, a little bit more by having a constructive relationship with a company, that is a better thing for us to do than something which might feel, good, appropriate, but doesn't actually yield to any change. And so we are, I think, in that way, sort of really, really pragmatic about what we can do to have impact, and try to work with any company that is willing to do this. And by the way, like our vision for impact only works if we can work with the companies that work across the country, that serve a variety of consumers, that if we're only working with IKEA and Patagonia, and Ben and Jerry's, it's not going to accomplish very much. So we have to find a way to work with companies that serve every every customer of every political persuasion. So that's how we think about this.
It's really interesting. I want to hone in a little bit more on the marriage of pragmatism and moral vision, if we can, that you're raising. I think this could be a very fruitful conversation for us. I was recently participating in a conference in London, the London Initiative, and at my table, we had a really interesting conversation about what the leading candidates, the leading non-Netanyahu candidates for the upcoming Israeli elections should say about peace.
Mm.
Because right now, there's not a tremendous appetite in the population for discourse around peace. And so some people say they have to just be pragmatic. They have to avoid talking about peace, get into power, the culture will shift, and eventually we might be able to secure an enduring and just peace. And other people say, as one person at Lonely Green said, you don't walk into a pizza shop and order a hamburger. if it's not on the menu, nobody's going to order it. And if we don't have people talk about and lift up the idea of a different kind of future, then the people aren't going to be clamoring for it. And so they actually have to take the risk and talk about what the final vision is, even though it's not pragmatic. And I found that I was sort of seated in between, in the midst of this battle between pragmatism and moral vision. And I think what you're talking about is threading that needle in a really powerful way because you have a vision that seems to be really deeply rooted in your Jewish and moral values, which is the idea that every person deserves to have dignity, that dignity can be achieved through our work. And there's a massive labor shortage, and we need the workers. And you just have to be realistic about it. You can't have a kind of ideological purity that then undermines your larger goal. And I feel very moved by the way that you're holding that tension here and in some ways honoring both.
Yeah, yeah. No, I really appreciate that. I mean, I think at some level to the conversation we're having, you do need both. I think in a way we benefit from the fact that there are other organizations that their value is speaking out loudly against in very strong moral terms. The advocacy groups, there's amazing human rights organizations, and in a way, part of the calculus we're making is that you know do we really add that much by being the 35th organization to sign that letter, or do we add more by being maybe the only organization that's actually working with big companies on refugees? And so the assessment that you might make if you were the only organization working on refugees maybe would land in a slightly different place. But understanding like what our specific value is and how we can advance impact, recognizing what others are doing and what our unique comparative advantage is.
It's really interesting. I want to shift gears for a moment, and to the I think even more theoretical if we can. And then I know that Bev has a question that's very, very practical, so it'll draw our feet back to the ground. Um, I was in a really interesting conversation at UCLA last night at the Badari Kindness Center with Father Greg Boyle, Valerie Kaur, Imam Jihad Turk, and it was moderated by Professor David Myers. And we were talking about the stranger, about the idea of the stranger. And I know that this is really, it seems, at least from what I've read and heard from you, Gideon, that the idea of our responsibility to the stranger as a core Jewish value feels really central to the as a driver for your work. And it says 36 times in the Torah that we need to treat the stranger with love, that we're not allowed to oppress the stranger. The stranger is met with the same legal standard as the citizen. Um, Really, most strikingly, that we have to love the stranger because we know the heart of the stranger, because we ourselves we're stranger. Kigerim ha'item be'eretz Mitzrayim. And in this conversation last night, Professor Myers was challenging me on the as the rabbi on the panel about the idea of the stranger and essentially saying maybe we should do away with this idea at this point. Like maybe it's outlived its utility because seeing another as a stranger in a way already means that they're different, that they're other, that we're the people who really belong here, and you are an outsider upon whom I will bestow my grace and my kindness, but you're not a real partner in the work of building this country. And I really objected to his framing, and we a little bit got to battle it out last night. But I've been thinking about it, and it really, as I was reading about your work and thinking about the notion of the stranger, I mean, obviously there's a kind of semantic issue about identifying another as the stranger, but do you feel that there's still utility conceptually in the idea of the stranger and the idea of a sacred responsibility, a kind of sacred trust among people who have the capacity to open doors and gates so that the stranger might be welcomed with love. And can the person who is the stranger eventually become not the other upon whom I'm bestowing grace, but actually part of my part of my own family and my own collective?
It's such an interesting question. I mean, I think that last point is kind of so critical, which is I really like the framework of the stranger as long as there is a path to integration, and a path to being part of the community. I think just one thing that I would add is that I think in the work that we do, there's actually a lot of value that comes from that estrangement, which is somebody who is new to a community, who is new to a workforce, sees things differently and
Mm,
can sometimes that's the root of innovation. It's why refugees have higher rates of entrepreneurship. That somebody is also coming in with fresh eyes and different perspective, and that's actually something which is hugely valuable in an economic environment. And so it's not just a disadvantage. It's actually it can be a real advantage. And just to um, connect this a bit more broadly to my Jewish faith. I mean, for me, it's totally appreciate all the ways this is embedded at the doctrinal level. But for me, it's just so much just about our history of not only that. The Jewish people have been displaced so many times, not only that we have still actually managed to survive that displacement, but that our experience has also been that when given the opportunity, we have thrived. And that spirit of that maybe that experience of being displaced and coming to a new place is actually a bit of a superpower. It actually you're more motivated, you're more invested. Maybe it's actually sort of an advantage that you bring, and that I think we see in our own history, and we see in other refugees as well, that having gone through that, it's actually can be the foundation for flourishing when given the opportunity.
so you're basically saying immigrants, they get the job done. Is that, yeah. I know, I
A
love that. I
very
love
long-winded way, yeah.
right. I love actually the reframe. I think that's really important that the very same thing that makes a person an outsider might also make them look at everything a little bit differently, and that could be an outsider's advantage. And we could all grow and flourish if we were to take that seriously. So I really love and appreciate that. I'm going to bring us to Bev's question, and I'll just ask if others have questions too. Please continue to put them in. And Bev, I hope I'm understanding your question, but since there are fewer refugees now who are allowed into the United States, and I believe that you are placing refugees not only in the US, but in Europe and Mexico. But since there are fewer refugees allowed to enter the United States, is the focus of these companies more on developing the refugees that are already hired and supporting them, and helping them move up and advance in the organization? Is that what
Yeah,
you're doing?
yeah, yeah. Essentially, so couple quick things. First, you're absolutely right that a lot of our work is outside of the U.S. and paradoxically, as the opportunity in the U.S. has diminished, the opportunity in Mexico has become just far more important. There's so many refugees who are now will need to stay in Mexico. There's huge demand for Mexican companies, so we're actually investing a lot more effort in connecting Mexican companies to refugees in Mexico. So that's one part of the answer. In terms of the U.S. itself, it's really two things. One is because there were so many refugees and other forcibly displaced folks who came to the U.S. during the Biden administration. There's actually still a very significant number who have not yet found work. And so a lot of our work right now is with the backlog of individuals who, maybe they came 2023, 2024, they're lawful, they're still work authorized, they just haven't been able to find decent jobs. So a big chunk of our work is on that. And then it is with people who have been in the country longer, maybe they took an entry-level job at the start. Can we help them get a mid-level job that better reflects their skills and education? We work with companies both to help hire at that level, to advance refugees who have been hired previously, to provide mentorship, training for that group.
So I think it sounds like you're focused specifically on the job training and job placement piece. Is there, now that we're finding out, I'm just hearing about these extraordinary stories of people who are in tremendous need, refugees and asylum seekers in Minneapolis, in cities that have really been targeted. Are you able, because of the relationships that you've developed with these folks, to also identify what some of those other non-work related needs are, so that other organizations or humanitarian aid organizations might be able to tap into that because you have such a vast network?
Yeah. So let me just clarify sort of how we work because it's actually a little bit the inverse of that, which is
Ah,
our focus and our value add is with big companies and helping big companies like we work very close with big companies HR. When a big company like Hilton or Pfizer is interested in hiring, we actually connect them with one of the hundreds of small local refugee serving organizations. So
ah,
we actually we partner with them, partner like amazing organizations like HIAS. So we have relationships with dozens of refugee serving organizations in Minneapolis. Our role is when, Marriott is interested in hiring, we make the connection, we help facilitate it, we make sure it works. But it's very much a partnership with these small local
I
organizations. So
see. I see.
so as they navigate the crisis in Minneapolis, and other places, to the extent companies come to us and want to provide support, we're additional support, volunteering, resources, within connecting them to some of those local organizations. But we are more of a sort of intermediary in that way.
I see. Okay, that's really helpful clarification. Thank you. I want to lift up Kellen's question, which is, in your experience, what actually moves companies from statements to measurable commitments, like the refugee hiring initiatives that you have led?
Yeah, yeah. So, in our experience, whether or not, sometimes it starts with somebody who's super passionate about this, sometimes it doesn't, but it only ever advances if a company sees measurable business results. That is
Okay.
that is the critical ingredient for getting a company from being open to this to actually wanting to do it at any scale. And generally what that looks like, and thankfully, like the work very often speaks for itself because companies, when they hire refugees, we get comments like we had to tell them to slow down because they were working too quickly. Absenteeism has dropped away. They sort of hit all the metrics in terms of performance, retention, things that companies really care about. So generally, our experience is that once we can engineer, a couple of projects and expose companies to this caliber of employees, companies want to do a lot more of it, but they have to see those measurable business results to then to want to invest in doing this seriously.
It's again your marriage of moral vision and pragmatism.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I have we're just going to have a couple more minutes together. And David, if you can, I asked you a clarification about your question. I want to ask it properly, so maybe you can just shoot me a note when you have a sec. Um, I I was with somebody yesterday who started a small business because she loved the work. She loved interacting with people at a particular moment in their life and helping them. And so it was a small business. And then she was very, very good at her job. And so it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And now she's the boss. And what that means is that she has hired people to do the part of her job that she loved, interacting with people and helping them through this difficult moment. And she is administering, she's billing, she's thinking strategically about the growth of the community, of the organization, and she's managing staff. And so I wonder, Do you get to really interact with some of the folks whose lives are being transformed by the work that you're doing? Because I have to imagine that part of what drove you into the work in the first place was that really deep humanitarian instinct that you have. And I'm thrilled that you're working at such scale. But do you feel that you're able to really connect with some of the people whose lives you're changing?
Um, Probably not as much as I would like, but the, there is nothing like meeting with the individuals when one can to sort of like understand what's at stake. And so it is so grounding and it is so humbling, and it's so energizing. So I, I do wish I could do more of it, but you're absolutely right about that sort of trade-off. And I I make peace that the strategic work ultimately is probably more valuable, but I do miss some of that more hands-on stuff for
Mm.
sure.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question unless I see anything else pop into the Q&A in the next moment or two. Um, I I imagine in this work that there's a lot of disappointment that you're really pushing back against the winds right now, and you're doing it very successfully. But I have to imagine that there's with every yes come a lot of no's. And I wonder if you can share what you do with disappointment, whether it's with corporations, institutions, other leaders, movements and how you draw strength in this moment. And we haven't really spoken about your Jewish identity, and I don't know if there's any part of the answer to my question that has to do with your spiritual life or faith life at all. But I'm really curious where you draw strength, especially given just how hard the work is and how hard the moment is.
Um, I guess there's a couple of parts to this answer. I think the first is I think growing up in South Africa was a very formative experience where I think I was much more directly exposed, maybe than the average American, to sort of a level of depredation and suffering. And I think part of my psyche is that I always just think about people whose lives and experiences are like so vastly worse, and that it just feels crazy to complain about, a company saying no or a particular setback when one thinks about what other people have to endure. And so I think that is just part of sort of how I'm hardwired, that it just feels almost silly to me, for the stuff that I'm doing when but by any measure, like the hardships I endure are most of the world would wish to have the hardships I endure. Um, um, and then I think I'm also just an inveterate optimist. My wife complains about this all the time that I'm overly optimistic. But I think on the issues that I work on, there really is grounds for optimism. I mean, even with everything going on right now, if you do a survey, and we've done a number of, how Americans think about refugees, something over 60% of Americans support refugees.
Mm.
Surveys in the 1930s of Americans, barely 20% cared about refugees. Even into the 70s, it was maybe 35% of Americans supported refugees. So there's this like crazy paradox that even as the US government has gotten far worse at
Yes.
this, the general American public is vastly more sympathetic to this issue than they were generations ago. They have concerns about how some of it's implemented. They have concerns about the southern border, but the level of sympathy on sort of every metric when it comes to refugees, the level of the percentage of people who actually support refugees in principle, or the percentage, who are worried about refugees, not integrating, that's dropped. And so from a sort of much larger perspective, it weirdly actually is going in a good direction. And if we ever figure out, some way to better express what the public wants, we could actually land in a decent place. And so I think the paradox is that the US government decades ago, used to be more pro-refugee against the wishes of the public, and now they're more anti-refugee against the wishes of the
That's so
public.
interesting. That is so interesting. Okay, I did not expect to hear that, and I'm really glad that you shared that because that actually makes me, dare I say, a little bit hopeful about things too. Gideon, I want to close us today with just by going back to something that you said earlier that I'm really struck by. Oh, wait, now I think there's a new. Okay, sorry. There is one last question, and okay. Bev said, how can a global organization I co-founded, Refugee Jumpstart Coaching, become a strategic partner with Tent? We provide free coaching to refugees globally with certified career, life leadership, and well-being coaches. A contact in your organization would be very helpful. And so I'd like to, if you could answer that very quickly, Gideon. And also, David asked earlier, he would like to understand a little bit more about recent trends in the foundation's funding. So maybe you can address those two really quickly, and then we'll wrap.
Sure. On the first one, reach out. You can send an email to gideon@tent.org, and we can figure out what's possible. On the funding, we've been very lucky that we are principally funded by our founder, Hamdi Ulakaya. He himself is Kurdish from Turkey. This is an issue that's very close to his heart. And so we've been very lucky to enjoy his support. Some of the companies we work with chip in as well. And so our funding hasn't really been affected because of the way it's structured. In that we're incredibly lucky and privileged.
Okay, I appreciate that. I want to just close for a moment by lifting up and really honoring what you shared earlier. Um, can we make things just a little bit better? And I mentioned that I was at UCLA last night, speaking with some ex on this panel, but beforehand we met with some really extraordinary students at UCLA, and one student named Hannah said that the following is her mantra, and so I'm just going to share this with all of us. She said, "I am a little soul who does one thing at a time with great love." And between Hannah and you, Gideon, can we make things just a little bit better? I feel this really is a reminder for all of us at IKAR and also for all of us in the world right now that even when the challenge before us is just enormous, our work is not to do everything. Our work is to do something. Can we make things just a little bit better? Can we be just one little soul who does things one at a time? And can we do so with great love? With huge gratitude to Ellen and Andrew and to the wonderful Charles Bronfman and the people at the Charles Bronfman Prize. Thank you for bringing wonderful folks into our community and into our lives. And Gideon, I hope you continue to find great strength in this work in the days ahead.